This video is on the unification of the forces of nature. I'm proposing the gravionic model of physical and spiritual systems, abbreviated GMOPS, as a way to resolve the conflict between different forces of nature. E equals GMC cubed is the equation that I believe solves this problem. GMOPS is a philosophical solution. Science is about the search for knowledge and about the facts of the physical universe, the physical reality that we see. This reality is unchanging in that the rules are always the same and it never learns. While spirituality is about the search for values, and not only values in the unchanging physical reality, but also the constantly changing values in the spiritual reality. And so the purpose of this is to show that all the forces of nature, including the spirit forces, are all combined in the same system. It appears that these systems are separated, but the job of philosophy is to find wisdom in unity. And I think I've found unity using the connections of gravity to combine the spirit and the physical systems. And in our own lives, these combine in the human mind, where the spirit controls the physical reality. So under gravionics, E is equal to energy, M is equal to mass, and G is equal to gravity. And gravionics proposes that all real things, everything that we can see in nature, everything that we know, is composed of energy. Some of that energy represents itself as mass, and some of that energy represents itself as gravity. We can identify which one is which because mass always represents identity. It represents things that exist, while gravity always represents relationships between things that exist. So what I would like to do is start at the level of an electron, which I believe is the first particle that has both local and universal gravity. It's not only attracted to physical systems nearby, but it's also attracted to the center of our galaxy and the black holes, and it's a part of the galaxy's drift of all materials. So if we look at an electron, I believe an electron is composed of more than one component, even though science now thinks it's an elementary particle. But I've been in electronics all my life. I put together my first ham radio receiver at the age of 8, I guess, or 8 or 9. And I have a degree in electronics with a perfect average. My experience with the electron shows that it is far too complex, I think, to be a single particle. It must be made up of multiple particles that are working together. And so I've defined two types of gravity that I see. I'm sure there's more, but this follows all the way from an electron to a galaxy. The gravions, the connections of gravity that bind the components inside the electron would be called self-gravions because they recognize what things are part of the same self. Within your own body, there's jillions and jillions of gravitational connections, but we know who you are and we know that you're an individual self. But also extending out from any mass is a gravitational field, and I call these advertising gravions because they set and advertise both the mass of the, how big the mass is, and they also advertise the potential difference. And so gravitational connections, whenever they make, these two factors are instantaneously transmitted between the two masses so that they know the size of each other and they know the potential difference. Potential difference is necessary for any current to flow. So I've noticed that this gravion always seems to be proportional to the voltage. The larger the voltage you have, the larger the gravionic space it seems to make. But even in superconducting, when apparently this gravion is reduced all the way to near nothing, there is still space created around the electron, and the creation of space is always the job of gravity. So I believe that there's more than one particle in here. They're connected by the connections of gravity, and this unit here is responsive to gravity locally and universally. And then if we move back into an atom, we see that there's a bond here called the strong force, and if we look at the proton and the neutron, we see that there's particles that make up it. Traditional science says there's the gluon that glues them together, but this is a complete misunderstanding of the job of mass and gravity. The relationship between two quarks can only be had by the connections of gravity. So this must be a connection not a particle, it's philosophically impossible for the particle to carry relationship. It carries identity. So these forces in here that are called the strong forces, both in the nucleus and in the quarks here, are actually gravitational connections, I believe, and even most of the energy is in these gravitational connections. So here we see that E equals GMC cubed is preserved in the electron, it's preserved in the atom itself, and as we move up the chain to larger atoms and molecules, chemical structures, whatever, all of the relationship, all of the bonds are always gravitational, and the mass always represents identity. So here shows that the strong force is a part of the gravitational system. I'll give an example later that I think proves it. Next we move on to the electromotive force, or light, as we like to call it. It's considered a force by current science, but to me that's only if you look at it midstream. The whole purpose of gravionics is to look at everything as systems and understand that when you have a connection of gravity with light flowing through it, it's energy moving from one system to another system. There's nothing universal or absolute that this force is just coming from nowhere. There's things going, cause and effect is happening here, and this is just the movement of energy from one system to another. And even in the photon itself, since it is a quantum, since it comes in and has identity, then that means there's a small portion of mass, even in a photon in light. It is responsible to local and universal gravity. So equal GMC cubed is withheld, it's held up within EMF and within the whole composite of different atoms and molecules. And then the next force is the weak force. And if we look at it, it's basically the ejection of a particle or radiation from very, very large atoms. And again, I can't see that this is any kind of primal force. It's a gravitational reaction. If we look at what's going on in here, between the proton and the neutron, there are gravitational connections. And the charge is being moved back and forth at extremely high rates, and it's instantaneous under gravity. This is one way that the nucleus is held together, is by this rapid movement of the charge between the proton and the neutron back and forth. But there are also gravitational bonds and a quite complex structure in here. And when radiation or an electron or some other particle is released from this, it's because the concentrations of energy, due to probability, all of a sudden arrive in one place at one time and allow it to break the bonds that's holding that material. And since electrons can be ejected from a proton, we know that all of these are the same energies. They're just represented in different ways. It's all the same mass, it just represents in different ways. It's all the same gravity, it just represents in different ways. And so the final example, well, we can go from here to a galaxy, follows all the same rules. It has the same electrical rules. Every bond between every mass is a gravitational one. I believe that there's bonds between our sun and the gravitational center, and that energies are actually being exchanged through those connections. And then the final one is human beings. We are gravitational units. And we have control over our physical reality. When man first arose on this planet, he looked at the physical reality and thought it was in charge and he was but its slave. But as mankind has progressed and learned more about nature, we've slowly been taking charge of the physical reality. And if we project into the future far enough, we'll see that the spiritual reality will someday completely rule the physical reality. And so I'd like to, we should consider everything a system. It makes no sense to study it midway. And that every physical reaction first and foremost starts with the connections of gravity. Science never starts studying anything until after the connections are made, so they're missing the very beginning of every reaction. Action at a distance is always gravitational, and it's instantaneous. All space is created by gravions. And gravity always transmits the potential difference in the size of different masses, whether it's a galaxy or an electron, and all energies transfer through such a system. Now, to combine it all together, what I would like to do is give the example of someone driving a car. When you drive a car, what happens is the spirit of the human and the spirit of the humans that made the car and processed the fuels for it, combine together that this human can push the accelerator down, and in that moment, the human is creating gravity. And every single component of that car, whether it's the strong force within the molecules, or it's the molecules themselves, or it's your physical being, or your mind and spirit, or the dust attached to the car, everything feels those gravitational forces that were generated by the spirit of man, and that were not there until the spirit of man decided to make those forces. So everything in nature can be described as energy. Part of it is showing up in mass, part of it is showing up in gravity, and part of it shows up in the spirit of the human being. Yes, and the other things that are obviously gravitational is like sight is involved in electromagnetic radiation and connections of gravity. The transmission of sound through the air is the space of one molecule bumping into the space of another and transmitting that energy. So that's all gravitational. Heat is gravitational, is the energy of one molecule giving its energy to its nearby neighbors. Dust, such as the electrostatic force, that's also lightning. Static electricity, all of these things are gravitational. And then, of course, we've shown the strong force, the weak force, and the electromotive force are all parts of the gravitational system. And your own feelings are a part of the gravitational system. That's why people like to ski so much, because you can feel gravity when you make those fast turns. So everything that we know can be made of just the three components: energy, mass, and gravity. Thank you.